Okay, welcome everyone. This is the training provided through the ESPC campaign organized by the Department of Energy. This is training number 6. If you have joined us on previous trainings, this is a recap of trainings 1 through 5. And this will not be new information, but it's going to be a recap of the most important elements that we've covered in the first 5 trainings. Those training informations, recordings, the slides, etc., have been captured and saved, so they're a great resource for later, and this one will be saved as well. We'll get started here in just a second. Again, slides from today's presentations are going to be provided to you later for reference and to share with colleagues who aren't able to join us live today. So today, if you have questions, so this is actually a Zoom meeting, not a webinar, so use the chat function. If you have questions, we'll keep an eye on those and try to answer those as we go along. And then certainly we'll get to them at the end if we haven't addressed those questions throughout the presentation. This is a meeting format, so everyone can unmute your mic and your camera as needed to ask questions, join the conversation. If you're not asking a question, please keep your microphone muted and so forth to cut down on background noise. We'll have a recording of this minus the Q&A and chat function that will be recorded later and be provided to you as a resource again. So my name is Deb Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of the Energy Services Coalition. And our speaker today and presenter is our lead trainer, excuse me, Chris Halpin. Chris has a wealth of experience in a number of different roles. And if you have attended our trainings before, you've seen and heard from Chris, and he'll continue that on today with a recap again of the first 5 trainings. Just a little background on Chris. Over 40 years of experience, all aspects, all sides of the transactions with ESPC. Founded and ran an owner's rep service. That's really a key function, having an expert on your side of the table to negotiate the best project for your facilities. He served as a project facilitator with Department of Energy on federal ESPCs for over 20 years. Chris is an engineer. He's a member of a number of different related professional associations. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to actually a little bit more about ESC, and I'll turn it over to Chris. So the Energy Services Coalition, if you're not familiar with us, we are a national nonprofit. We are a public-private partnership comprised mostly of state energy office personnel as well as local government folks that have an interest and have a role in implementing ESPC projects, and then also private sector, so energy services companies, financing providers, owners reps, et cetera, that really kind of make the overall kind of ESPC ecosystem. And the key is we want better educated, better informed public sector owners that can help drive projects to kind of their maximum value. And also we want the private sector folks who are implementing projects at the table to help raise that learning curve. So that's ESPC, and we're honored to be part of the ESPC campaign that's supported by the Department of Energy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris, and let you start with the agenda, and we can just move on through.
All right, great. Thanks, Doug. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I know you all got very busy schedules, so it's nice that you're able to make some time for us and hopefully come away learning at least one new thing today, even though this is a summary of the past 5 trainings. I know not all of you have probably attended the trainings and workshops we've done in the past, but there's going to be links to virtually all of them in this presentation, which will be good. You'll be able to go back and watch them on the YouTube channel that ESPC Campaign has. So we've gone through introductions, talked about what is ESPC. We're going to go through sort of how streamlined the procurement is with ESPC, some of the features and benefits, how you get a contract or a project actually started, how you get your scope together from the beginning, how you select your ESCO partner, and it was just about the most important thing you're going to do in this whole process, conducting the IGAA, the investment grade audit, selecting your financing partner, which is probably the second most important decision you're going to make, actually executing the agreement with the ESCO, getting into design, construction, commissioning, and then the performance period, which is where the measurement, verification, operations, and maintenance, and then reporting goes on. Next slide. So there's a bunch of acronyms. We use most of these throughout the presentation. I won't run through them here, but that way you have some background and what they are. Next slide. So we've set this up, and I want to thank Jamie Garrett, who's on here, part of our ESC team, coming up with the idea that this presentation is really sort of from the perspective of a municipality, right? And they've got all these issues and they're looking for solutions. And so, the first thing is, and I'm sure many of you have been in this position, you're like, oh my God, help, right? We have the community's asking for solar panels, or there's problems with the air conditioning, or our streetlights are old. And I see that where I live here in Las Vegas, we've got 30-year-old streetlights. And there's no budget to do any of these projects, right? And it just keeps getting sent next year, keep reapplying, and maybe we'll get the money, right? Next slide. Ooh, didn't go down. There we go. So performance contracting can come to the rescue in most cases, right? And what it is really is the use of guaranteed savings, and this is a DOE definition, from the maintenance operations budget or utilities as capital to make needed upgrades and modernizations to your building environmental systems financed over a specific period of time, right? It's very formal. The second one is one I sort of came up with a while ago. For me, it's really a financial mechanism used to pay for today's facilities upgrades with tomorrow's energy savings. So what you're really doing is capitalizing and then amortizing all those savings you're going to get for 10 to 20, 25 years and bringing that value back to now, right? And you borrow the money and you're able to, just like a sort of a mortgage on a house or a car loan, you can do that with upgrading your facilities and street lights and water treatment plants and all of that. And because the risk profile of these deals is so safe compared to most other places you can put your money today. I mean, look at the stock market, right? It's down 300 points today, 600 points last week. You just don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes you can get the performance of these of a hedge fund, 12, 15%. Sometimes they're usually 8 to 10% return on investment with the risk of a T-bill, right? This is an old tagline from EPA Energy Star buildings that really works here for performance contracting. And this is how I like to explain it to people. At the end of the day, it's really design build contracting, pretty sophisticated design build contracting with a focus on guaranteed savings. All right, next slide. So from a cost perspective and a budget perspective, ESPC is a budget cost neutral financing mechanism, right? If you look at this bar chart, this has been around for years. I think NREL started it 15 years ago. Before the ESPC contract, you've got your existing operations and energy budget, right? This is just say that's a snapshot of agency costs or city costs, municipal costs, school district costs, whatever the case may be. So then during the ESPC contract, and the size of these bars is accentuated for presentation purposes. You're not going to save 50%, but it's typically 20, 30%, sometimes 40 if you do sort of deep retrofits. You're going to save that money, right? Reapply that money towards the financing payment and always have sort of a net positive cash flow. So you're always getting slightly positive cash flow. And in many states, I think the federal government requires it by law, and many states also require it in their statutes. And at the end of your 10, 15, 20, 25-year contract, you get all those savings. They all go back to you, right? So it allows you to basically take the savings that are being created by replacing equipment, and you're sort of fencing it from a financial point of view to pay for that stuff over time, right? Which is great, because if you just did this on your own, usually in most municipal environments, you save $100,000 on your electric bill, you get rewarded the next year by the budget people cutting your electric budget by $100,000, right? Here you get to reinvest it in your facilities. Next slide. So this municipal person, maybe she's like the city manager or something, or the head of sustainability is like, this sounds really good, but procurement always takes so long, right? I mean, I just went to this with a city here in the US, and it took 3 years to get it through legal, right? Just to get it through legal, right? So that took a long time, and procurement and all that. So should we do these separately, like do a street lighting project, do an HVAC project, do a solar project, or should we kind of bundle them together? And And also the thought of hiring somebody to do the energy audits, so, your local energy auditing firm, hire a design team, right? Hire a cost estimator, hire a commissioning agent, and then a construction contractor. And that can take years. I've lived it. My first part of my career, I did this right out of school for hospitals and schools all over Florida at the time. And it took sometimes 3 to 5 years to get from that one place to the next. And if everybody could mute themselves, thanks. But with performance contracting, you can get this done a lot faster, right? And from a procurement point of view, if you do this piecemeal over several years, it just takes so much time. There's so many procurements. So how can we do this otherwise? And there's a link we put, and you'll start to see this through the presentation. There's a link here to the first training that we did, Introduction to ESPC. And we're not going to do it now, but when you get copies of these slides, you click on that, and that's a live link to the ESPC Campaign's YouTube channel. And it's great. You get these from the very beginning all the way to the end. Dub has edited out the Q&A so that you can ask questions without it being all over the internet. So next slide. So with ESPC, it allows streamlined procurement. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite things about this. I used to do this as an ESCO in the 90s. And then I did it as an owner's rep. I was also a global energy manager. And the fact that I didn't have to convince my people inside where I worked to do 4 procurements, now I only had to convince them to do 2. My God, what a difference, right? It was amazing. And it took half the time, usually, sometimes a third of the time. So you'd have to put out an RFP for your energy auditing firm, right? Then an RFP for the design consultant. And usually you've got to ask for the money the year before to get it into the next budget year, right? And then the same thing each time. A commissioning agent, a cost estimator. Then you get your whole, schematic drawings, design development, construction drawings, specs, the whole thing together, put it out to bid, right? Usually you have to sort of take the low bid. Doesn't always get you what you want. There's always change orders, right, with normal design bid build. And there's no ongoing M&V. There's no real measurement verification. There's no operations and maintenance. There's no commissioning typically. If you do get commissioning, it's usually what I call sort of faux commissioning, a lot of box checking, unless you have a really good sort of lead consultant who's really sweating the commissioning details for you. With performance contracting, it's all built into the contract, right? We'll go into that a little bit later. So you do an RFQ, usually for an owner's rep first. We'll talk about that some more later, but that's a quick and easy one. The big one is really getting your ESCO on board, then your financier. And this is typically, again, 6 months to a year versus 2 to 3 years, sometimes 5 years. Next slide. So how do you know if it's right for your city, right? Most places, any municipality, this can be a state agency, it can be a Department of Corrections, health, anything. Most don't like risk, right? That's what you're in a government function, right? Risk is not supposed to be part of most government functions. You would think, right? These days, who knows? But there's typically no budget for any of this stuff, right? You're usually barely getting by with just funding your main mission, whether it's, teaching kids, healing sick, whatever the case is, running police departments, fire departments. There's usually a huge amount of deferred maintenance, right? I read a number, there's so many $1 trillion deferred maintenance of public buildings in this country right now. And with, climate change is really starting to devastate infrastructure everywhere, whether, hurricanes in the Southeast, fires in the West, floods and tornadoes in the Midwest. We need more resilient equipment that can stay up and running during these natural disasters. And energy prices are rising, right? It's crazy what's happened in the past 5 years that natural gas and electricity have just gone like this, and they're going to continue to go up. So has anybody else done this, right? I don't want to just like jump into this not knowing if this is something that's been done before. Next slide. So how do we address these things, right? Because if you're the project champion, if you're this woman or you're the guy that's in charge, you're going to have to convince a lot of people that this makes a lot of sense for your group. The nice thing about performance contracting, it's built into it using the best practices that we've talked about, right, since last summer when we started this. You use these best practices. It is a natural risk mitigation tool that you have in your tool belt, right? You just follow the steps that we've laid out, and we're going to continue to go through here, and you get fabulous risk management, right? Again, when I was doing this as an owner's rep full time, up until a few years ago, that's exactly how we viewed ourselves. We worked very closely with the owner and the facilities managers and all that, and we kind of help them manage the risk over time. And because it's an iterative project, you're not going like hiring the architect and engineer and they do 100% design, right? You're hiring an ESCO and they slowly put together, 30% submission, 60%, 90%, 100%. And that way you can make decisions as you go along with a turnkey partner, right? So it's not like you're throwing drawings at somebody and they're coming back with bids and they're hoping you're not going to notice the mistakes and then they get to change order you to death, right? During construction. Here you have turnkey partner, clear roles and responsibilities, open book pricing, and performance guarantees. So you basically have a collaborative partner in this who wants this to succeed just as much as you do, right? And again, from my perspective, having done this previously when I was young in design bid build, I haven't seen anything better than this to get public infrastructure renewal done. If you have no budget, right, this doesn't require much of any upfront capital other than maybe hiring a consultant because the savings are paid for over time. Excuse me, the savings pay back the loan over time, including the cost of your owner's rep. We'll talk about that later. The deferred maintenance issue, you can really attack a lot of deferred maintenance, especially if it's anything to do with HVAC, lighting, controls, building envelope, stuff like that. Carpet and paint and wallpaper and fencing and, bricks and stuff, it's not really going to help, but anything that's energy or energy related and getting more resilient equipment, right? One of the best things you can do is when you're replacing or repairing this equipment, you get all new equipment, you're getting back to like 0 day for maintaining everything in a really positive way, doing predictive maintenance and preventive maintenance going forward, as well as putting in, solar and battery energy storage systems these days that become very cost competitive for less than a 10-year payback. Typically, you can get these in and they build resilience, super resilience into most facilities, especially for critical facilities that are like designated places of refuge and so on. Then energy prices are rising, right? This continues to go on. But the more efficiency you put in and the more renewables you put in, the better you have a risk mitigation agent there. Next slide. So is it tried and true? This has been going on for 40 years. When I worked for an ESCO in the 90s, we were like the second or third firm in the business starting in 1982. So this has been going on for decades, right? There's been over 6,000 of these projects. And these are all live links. You can go through this on your own time later on. But there's, 7.5 billion has been done just in 20, 25 years, saving over $17 billion. And there's state by state data here. As of 2021, you can go and click on your state. And please, if you're not sure of what's gone on in your area, contact your state energy office. And this is a link going to all the state energy offices in the country. Next slide. So we've got some case studies here. And again, we're not going to click on these, but these are live links. And these are DOE ESPC Campaign case studies where this school district in Virginia had rapidly rising utility rates. They did 2 rounds of ESPC, one in 2008, one in 2018, about $20 million worth of projects. They're saving over $10 million since then, right? Which is huge for school district. It allowed them to put in new lighting, new HVAC, new boilers, building automation system upgrades, and enhanced data tracking, right? This is huge. So now they're basically being able to integrate sort of the Internet of Things into these schools, right? Which is huge. And had no effect on their debt capacity, right? Which is masterful. They also, and if you can swing one of these during your project, this is a great thing to do. Hire an energy manager, right? If there's enough cash in your deal to hire an energy manager and pay for their salary, that really helps you in the long term. And they also implemented low cost and no cost as well as capital upgrades. West Palm Beach, like a lot of cities and towns around the country have been doing the past 10 years, replaced their old high pressure sodium and metal halide lighting, maybe even some mercury vapor, with new LEDs and induction. This is 2011, so in some areas they had to use induction. Now you can use LED everywhere. They did over 6,800 fixtures, 54% energy savings with the LEDs, right? I mean, that's huge. Cut your nighttime load in half, right? For most municipalities, they pay a huge amount and street lighting, depending on how urban an environment it is. And by cutting that bill in half, that makes a huge difference. It makes you, in states where you can buy electricity third party, it gives you better pricing by being able to reduce that load. It reduced their GHGs by over 10%. And the residents and police department were really happy with the improved light levels, right? So it's security improvement as well, right? That's huge. I helped the state of North Carolina do this about 6, 7 years ago. They were able to build in controls with the lighting project that could flash during emergencies and escort people to places of refuge. So there's a lot you can do with this. And these LEDs were also dark sky compliant. It's another really cool thing to take a look at. That's a live link. And then finally, the Fort Worth Service Center was really looking to, save money and fix things, right? And they had this 63,000 square foot building. It was built in 87, 30-ish years old. 47% energy reduction in this one building, which is fabulous. A lot of the normal stuff is part of a, $10 million project, lighting, air conditioning controls, and water system improvements, right? Which is a big deal. Next slide. So you can see this gets done in a lot of places, in a lot of different venues. So how do you get started? Next slide. So one of the things that we think is a great way to start, this ESPC campaign has myself and a few others, project facilitators available from DOE through these office hours where you can speak one-on-one with a subject matter expert like us. And you can do anything from, hey, I have this project I've been thinking of. How can I get started, right? Sort of off camera when you don't have to ask a question in front of everybody like this. We just helped somebody in a very large state agency in a very large state review an IGA, investment grade audit, and it made a huge difference, right? Huge difference. They're able to go back to the negotiating table better armed to be able to negotiate a deal with the ESCO. So please just click on that link and you submit a form and we'll get in touch with you. The next step is identifying a project champion to lead the effort. Consider hiring an owner's rep. You'll hear me say that a few times through this. Again, I used to do this for a living when I was working for an ESCO in the 90s. Boy, I wished I had owner's reps then, because I had a few deals fall apart on me that I had developed over 2 and 3 years and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on my company's money that just fell apart because the owner didn't really understand what they were buying. They didn't understand the risk, and they just killed it instead of doing anything and taking that risk. So owner's reps are hugely helpful, and there's a link there to a list of owner's reps. And the next step, assemble and educate your internal team about the ESPC processes and gaining commitment. Next slide. So if you've sat through this before, you've probably seen this program phase. It's a little bit of an eye chart here, but it's the flow diagram that DOE has for the 5 phases of performance contracting. When you're starting out, you're really in the planning phase, right? We just figured out, yes, we think we want to do this. It looks like it makes sense. Maybe I've hired an owner's rep already. I've got the people in the rest of the city started thinking about this, starting to get them on board. Then we go through procurement, go through the investment grade audit. Whoops, sorry about that. Contract development process, the design, construction, commissioning, and the performance period, right? And we'll talk about this some more as we get into it. So there's a link here as well for getting started. There's a whole training we did last, I think it was September, just about this, right? And how you really get started. So that's a great resource. Next slide. Okay, so identifying your project champion, and this might be you, right? I know there's a few people on this call that I already know, and they're more or less the project champion on their project for their state agency or their municipality. So the project champion really drives the progress. They are the unofficial cat herder, right? If you will, as you've got to get the rest of the people in your organization all rowing in the same direction, all on board with what you're trying to do here. And it requires, quite a bit of interaction with your internal folks, as well as the external folks, the ESCO, owner's rep, financier. You build the support internally, help educate the decision makers and the stakeholders with the help of your owner's rep usually. Address the decision makers' priorities, right? I can't tell you how important that is. You find out who has veto power over a project that you want to do, you get them involved. If they have problems with it, you need to get them resolved early. You don't want to wait till you've gotten, 6, 9 months in, and then the attorney goes, "Oh, no, we can't do this," right? I've lived that one. You don't want to do that, right? And you're the one that understands the organization's processes, right? Your owner's rep, your ESCO will get to know them somewhat, but they don't know the inside baseball of what really goes on inside your organization. Next slide. So, and you've heard me mention this before, the owner's rep, again, they offer really good long-term value. You basically have an expert on your side. I liken it to, 20, 25 years ago, people were like commissioning agents. I don't know. Are they really worth it? Now you wouldn't think about designing a new and important building without hiring a commissioning agent because you know the value that they bring, right? And an owner's rep that has background in ESPC is very similar. They're almost like a commissioning agent for your program, right? And the process, making sure that you get what you're paying for, right? And they're completely independent, should never be working for ESCOs, should only be working for owners, right? And they can do all these things. I won't go through it in a lot of detail here because we don't have the time. Hopefully in the future, we're going to do a whole presentation just on using an owner's rep because we have a set of owner's rep RFP and agreement documents just about finished. DOE is going to be issuing here in the next few months, hopefully. Also, I wrote a white paper for DOE about 8 years ago called An Ally in Your Corner. You can click on that link when you get it. It has a lot of good background on how to hire an owner's rep and the value. Also, this Performance Contracting National Resource Center that DOE put together with sort of the ESCO community and other interested parties put together a training certificate series that was posted, and now it's been taken down temporarily. It'll be posted back up, but just keep checking the PCNRC website here every few months. The best practices around this is hire them as early as possible. If you're thinking about doing one, get an owner's rep early. They can help you think through and how to present it to your internal folks, get them on board, right? Or maybe the decision is, this doesn't make sense for you. It's too small, or, there's other reasons, right? You're going to do a huge bond referendum or something, right? Who knows what's going to happen? So that's best to get them on early. And as I mentioned before, they should not be working for ESCOs. That creates a huge conflict of interest. And this, I mentioned this already, Lawrence Berkeley Lab is developing this OR solicitation and contract docs to use. Next slide. So assembling your team. And again, we had a whole workshop just on this, right? So I'm not going to read this whole slide, but it's basically getting all the folks, like I said earlier, that have veto power, right? Or like legal and finance or procurement. They can all help you get this project through, or they can stop it dead, right? So they all need to be on board from the very beginning. Your maintenance folks are often left out of all new construction projects, usually renovations. They're usually brought in at the very end. And I grew up in a family of laborers and tradesmen, and my uncles used to bust me about this all the time. You engineers don't know how to do this, da, 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 da. And he's right. They were right. A lot of them don't know how to do that. So you bring your operations and maintenance people in from the beginning. You get them on board with this, they will be part of the solution because they're the ones who know these buildings. No one else will ever know these buildings like they do, right? And your project will be successful if they're on board. And your construction folks, same thing. They need to know what the responsibility is going to be with one of these deals because there's going to be a fair amount of time spent requiring this. And oversight, getting outside oversight, whether it's your owner's rep or if you have fire marshal, you have state construction code people that need to be involved, and approving authorities, whether it's city manager's office, board of regents, right? Hospital board, JCO, whatever the case is, they all should be alerted to this early and often. I've done this for school boards, and we do 3 or 4 presentations over the course of a year or two to make sure the school board is clear on what's going on so there's no surprises. Next slide. So, and this is purposely done, right? There's so much we want, no, actually need to do, right? For every city, town, school district, whatever, there's all this deferred maintenance. Stuff is just falling apart. That's one thing COVID showed us, how bad HVAC systems are in public spaces in this country, right? It's disgraceful, but that's just the way it is. And performance contracting can help you manage that. But it's right, it's the 900-pound gorilla. So what do you do? How do you narrow down a project scope? Next slide. So first thing is identifying the project goals and objectives, right? It's not a panacea. You can't have everything, right? And like I said, there's no new carpets. There's no new, paint and wallpaper and all the stuff, furniture. You're not going to get that, the FF&E, right? But boy, you can get a lot of other things. So one of the things that I've seen done and really organizations that do this very well internally already, they survey staff. What do you see from a maintenance point of view? What do you see from an operational point of view? What do you see from a mission point of view? I was involved in a school district here in Las Vegas. It's a huge district. They went around and interviewed principals and teachers and able to, when they replaced all the lighting, put in the controls that everybody wanted, that the teachers could actually use. Instead of just a bank of switches, they now have controls that they can use from an app on their phone, right? And they can do different scenes and this and that. And so that alone made that project successful, you know. Working with an OR to develop high-level pre-qualification study. Again, this is something I learned when I was doing this full-time as an owner's rep. Instead of going through and, put out the RFP, you hire an ESCO, they get going, and you realize we have like a $2 million project. Is it really worth the effort versus 10 or 20 or 30, all right? Get an owner's rep to do a very high-level sort of a walkthrough audit, and actually sort of level one on it to get an idea, is there, right? Is it worth me going through and getting into my procurement process, my legal process, financial process for a project that may not be that big, right? So that this also helps you not only understand sort of how big is the breadbasket for those of you who remember that term, but identifying any other funding opportunities that are out there and financing mechanisms, right? At least for now, there's still this Inflation Reduction Act funding that's out there that you might be able to get your hands on, and a few other things. So that's super, super helpful. Next slide. So this is a energy conservation measure matrix. It comes from a real project up in New England where the ESCO did a great job here identifying projects that they had looked at and included in the project, and projects they investigated and did not include in the project. X's are in, O's are out, right? And the ones that are blank were not investigated. And again, we don't have time to go through this whole thing. That was one of the main features of this training 3, going through the investment grade audit, contract, and project execution. But it's a great way to, work out with your ESCO early on, what's the universe look like for us, and then go through and figure out what makes the most sense for you, right? And then you can cut the project scope down. Next slide. So then the financials. Once you start to get an idea of sort of what it's looking like from a scope point of view, you can start getting some sort of ballpark numbers on what the costing might look like, right? Because this needs to pay for itself, right? You can't just put in all new equipment with no savings, or it won't really be financeable, right? So because these are guaranteed savings, you work with the ESCO and they're able to figure out for you exactly how much down to the dollar savings will be generated by doing this project. And then over, like I said, 10, 15, 20, 25-year term, how much you can afford to install, right? And much like when you do the 6-year car loan versus the 5-year car loan, you can afford a nicer car, right? It's very similar to this with performance contracting. So some of the key financial aspects really are no upfront investments required from the facility. This is why you hire the ESCO. They do the investment grade audit basically on spec. We'll talk about how that gets done in a minute. And then you bring in the financing, and they basically pay for the construction, pay the ESCO throughout the construction process. And only after the project is completed and accepted do you start making the payments, right? As opposed to a design bid build where you're doing draws out of your pocket every month of the year or two. Right here, it's going out of the financier's pocket until the project is done. So from that alone, it's a fabulous way to get things done. And you can leverage capital funds with private financing. So if you know you need $20 million worth of work done, you have $1 million, you put that $1 million into the deal, lowers your principal amount, makes your savings worth that much more, because then the amount of repayment is much less, right? So it allows you to get a lot more done. And contractors have to guarantee these savings will be at least equal to the payments for the upgrades. That's this net positive cash flow I talked about earlier. I think they're typically 15 to 25 years is the sweet spot. 15 to 17 is sort of the sweet spot in most of these. And a lot of financiers love these, right? Because if they're like patient investors, like pensions, right? And, funds for states and other institutional investors, they love these because they've got a modest return and very little risk, right? So they're very financeable. And we have a whole training just about this, training 4 in that link. Next slide. So the power of leveraging funds. Again, there was a whole presentation just on this, right? And like a lot of these federal funds, as everybody knows, are starting to be peeled away. So if you have a project you're working on, I urge you to, get your deli ticket, get deli counter ticket, as I like to say, for your project, especially for solar, um, battery storage, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and heat pumps. Right? They're the four technologies you can get from the Inflation Reduction Act. But by putting capital in, whether it's your own capital or incentives from utilities or federal or state funds, you can sometimes increase the cost of the project, the scope of the project by 50% or 100%. Right? We don't have time to get into these numbers, but it shows you that you're able to leverage quite a bit of money to build a much bigger project. You can typical leveraging ratios you see on this last line, 1.3 to 2.1. So every dollar leveraged, it's 1.3 to 2.1x of scope that can be added to the project. Right? And this is a real project. Right? This was done in the Southeast. Next slide. So they have a viable project. The departments are on board now on. Next slide. So time to select your ESCO partner, right? And again, we had a whole training just on this. Your ESCO, in case you hadn't sat through any of these, they're your turnkey provider. They do all the professional construction, commissioning, measurement and verification, operations and maintenance services, right? Truly turnkey. They do everything from the audits to the design, the construction, management, everything. One of the key differences between regular design bid build and this, and I mentioned this earlier, is there's no change orders of performance contracting. If they've put together the scope for you and you agree to it, and they missed, and I've seen this a few times, not much, because ESCO's usually really good at doing these. They didn't count the lights in one, wing of the hospital, whatever. And the scope says replace all the lighting in the whole hospital. That's on them, right? If it's something that you didn't tell them, right? Oh, we want to add this other building. Well, that's a scope change, right? And you're going to get a change order for that. And they assume that construction and performance risk, right? Done properly, 95% of the risk is on the ESCO, right? And we'll talk about that some more later. And they do the commissioning. Again, you get real commissioning done with performance contracting. And if you use model documents, you're going to have that built into the contract. So you have some recourse to be able to get what you want out of the deal. How to select them, you're going to issue a RFP. If you're in a state that already has a pool of contractors, you're very lucky because then you can just pull one from that list, or you can do your own secondary selection. And DOE has a whole solutions center best practices program set up for this with this live link. Next slide. Okay, so now you've hired your ESCO. We're in phase 2. We're going into the investment grade audit. Again, this training 3 covers that. Next slide. So you're going to, execute the IGAA agreement with the ESCO. So this is basically a document, usually, it's 10, 20 pages saying the ESCO is going to go through, look at all your facilities, look at all your utility bills, operations and maintenance costs, how much are you paying to repair your ancient air conditioning equipment, and so on. Put together the scope, put together the report requirements, what's going to be expected of them and what's going to be expected of you as the owner, right? You're going to have to basically, get your folks who are running the buildings and doing maintenance. You may have contractors that are doing it for you now. They're going to have to get involved in this and put together a plan that makes sense. And they're going to have a list of deliverables rather, with a timeline and a cost, right? And the cost is going to be only if you look at the IGA at the end and go, you know what, this just really isn't for us, and you cancel it, then you have to pay them for the audit, right? Which is fair, right? They're not going to do this for free. If you decide to go forward, that investment grade audit cost, right? It's usually 5 to 15 cents a square foot ish, sometimes more. That gets rolled into the financing, right? And it's typically 3 to 5% of what you pay for a whole project. So it makes a lot of sense doing this with an agreement. So everybody has an out if needed. Otherwise, it's either just roll it into the financing. Next slide. So again, we did a whole training just on all the different components. So we're not going to go through this in any detail, but the investment grade audit really starts with a baseline. How much energy are you using now and where? How much money are you spending now and where? And it's not just cost. It's like, how are you really operating your buildings? How are they getting maintained? How are things getting repaired, replaced, and all of that? And it's a snapshot in time, and that utility bills are typically averaged over a few years to get sort of what a typical year is, right? We had a real problem with that the past few years with the pandemic, right? For 20 and 21, building usages were all over the place. So as part of that, you've got your M&V and commissioning plans are usually embedded inside the energy audit. You've got your financial analysis as you get further into the IGA. Your ESCO is going to do some, rule of thumbs at the beginning. And then as you get, 60, 70% of the way in, they start bringing in the mechanical, electrical subs, controls contractors, and getting real fixed price, fixed sum contracts so that you have a really good idea of how much this is actually going to cost. You're also then going to be doing risk analysis with them. This is where your owner's rep can really come in handy to see how much are we spending where? Does this scope really make sense for us? Are we going to be able to maintain all this new equipment, right? That's a big risk. If you put in, solar and battery storage and cogeneration and all the stuff that's, you may not have used before, you may want to think about hiring somebody to maintain it. And when you get towards the end of the IGA, the final scope, the proposal from the ESCO that says, here's the scope, here's everything we're going to do, here's the price, and here's the plan. Here's how this is all going to get built and commissioned and measured and verified, and then all the final reviews and approvals. And again, that whole IGA and project execution training we talk about doing this in chunks. 30% is like your baselining, 60% is your scoping, 90% is sort of like final scope, final pricing, M&V, commissioning, all that, and then the final IGA. Much like in design bid build, you don't hire an architect and engineer to design a new building and they come back in a year, right? You do programming, schematics, design development, construction drawings. It's just like that here. Next slide. So how do you get your financing partner? Next slide. Right, so we're back up into the contract development process, right? So we had a couple of financiers on here a few months ago talking about how to really work with finance people. And one of them said, which I thought was great, Steve Gale from D.A. Davidson said that he likes to be involved early in the process. And instead of just waiting till you've kind of figured out, is this a 10, 12, $15 million project? Now we need to put out the RFP for the finance partner. They like to be involved early so they can run scenarios for you. If we get this IRA money, what if the utilities, like here in Las Vegas, the utility just increased the incentive amounts by 40%. Right? That's huge. That can really change your planning, right? So those kinds of things can be scenarioed out earlier on in the process. Otherwise, what most people do is they have the financial advisor early, helps them put out an RFP. ESCO can help you with some of the scoping in that, and then you hire your financial partner. Next slide. So, like I said, in-house leadership. Sometimes you have an outside financial advisor or FA issue the RFP, come up with ballpark financing principal amount. And there's a lot to this. Again, we don't have time to go this in detail, but it's just like you would get financing for anything else you're doing, whether it's leasing new fire trucks or new buildings or whatever. And like I mentioned before, utilizing your financier to model the various options early on in the IGA process is a great idea. And this is all covered in this training for. Next slide. So finally, you've got the deal basically packaged, right? The final thing is to get all of your approvals, right? This is where you're going in front of, State Bond Commission, or you're going for the Board of Regents or City Manager's Office or School Board, Board of Trustees, whoever it is, to get everybody's vote and to make sure that you've got the scope, you've got the buy-in from everybody politically. That is so important. And you then got the money set aside. And once that is done, you can then sign the contract with the financier. You've signed the contract with the ESCO, signed the contract with the financier, and you're off to the races. Next slide. So, and these are some best practices through the process. And I've already talked about these mostly already, but stakeholder engagement early and often. I know this is awfully repetitive, but boy, letting everybody know what's coming down the road really helps you in one of these projects. Is most folks will only have done this once in their career, maybe twice, right? Get everybody involved early on. The veto power rules. Ensure your robust savings ensure your savings guarantee is robust, rather, right? Again, that's where your owner's rep can help, has got to cover the annual debt service, and remedies for deficiencies if the ECM performance is compromised, right? And we have a whole thing about that in the training 3. Same thing with operations and maintenance. It needs to be made clear in the contract who's doing what, right? If you're going to install a couple $1 million worth of new equipment, it's a new day, right? You're going to have to make sure either your folks are going to do it well and get really good training from the ESCO, which is also included in the contract, or you're going to hire the ESCO to do the maintenance. And they sometimes hire other local subs to do that. And lay it all out, right? There's a risk responsibility matrix we'll talk about next that lays that out. And you make sure the IGA is incorporated by reference into the agreement. So again, we could do an hour just on this, but this is a great tool Department of Energy came up with like 20 years ago. And I've been bringing it over the past 15, 20 years to all my state and local government clients. There's a link at the bottom here that actually gets you to this document. It's a fabulous thing because it really encapsulates the risks, the responsibilities, and the performance of a whole performance contract in plain English. It's not written in legalese, right? So it's great for everybody on your team to take a look at this. And when I would do this as an owner's rep, we sit down with the whole internal stakeholder team and go through the risk responsibility performance matrix front to back, right? So it really is a wonderful tool to be able to use. Next slide. So you've got your partner. You've executed the investment grade audit, completed the IGA, you've got your financing partner, the agreement's been signed. Let's get going. All right, now we're actually building stuff. Next slide. So the first thing that happens is, the ESCOs get these done turnkey prices based on, 30, 40% construction drawings, typically. Some of them, like lighting and water field or ECMs, are typically 100% designed during the IGA, but most of them, they then have to go and either they do it internally or hire the local engineers to finish out those designs, right, for control systems and HVAC, so on and so forth. Then they do your equipment submittals like you have in normal construction projects. Then they get into the actual construction of the equipment, commissioning, running it all through its paces. And then ultimately the project acceptance, right, where you're saying, okay, everything's been done. It isn't just installed, right, like you would do on a normal project. They've actually given you a post-installation report, which again, that's in one of our trainings previously. There we go. And you finally accept the project, and then the measurement, verification, operations, and maintenance starts. And using eProject Express, I'll talk about this in a few minutes. Fabulous tool Lawrence Berkeley Lab has come up with for DOE. That's a record-keeping tool. It's just phenomenal. Next slide. So here we are, last 2 phases, right? You get into the construction, commissioning, and into the performance period. Next slide. So this little step chart, and again, we don't have time to go through this whole thing, but this is one I developed for one of the previous trainings. You start off with your kickoff meeting like you would do with any construction project. ESCO finalizes the designs. You and your owner's rep should be looking at these. This is where you get your construction folks and your operations and maintenance folks to look at all these drawings, look at all these equipment submittals, and back check against the IGA. If they said you were going to get, XYZ air conditioning company's chiller that has an efficiency of X, you want to check that in the design and then in the follow-up submittal to make sure, back check to make sure everything is as according to plan, right? Then they start putting the work in, assign your staff to witness things, right? As the ESCOs are installing things and commissioning things and doing M&V activities, measuring lighting, KW, and so on, make sure your folks are involved. And again, we have a whole training on that previously. You get substantial completion certificates, sometimes by ECM, sometimes by building, punch lists like you would have in any construction project. Then this PIR report I mentioned, they do the final completion certificate, and then project is accepted. And typically 30 to 60 days later is when your invoices start from your financier. Next slide. So I love the picture of her, right? How do we know things are being done as promised? How do we make sure the savings are being achieved? Because if you need to report these to like DOE, right? All the IRA funding and bipartisan infrastructure law funding requires reports back to DOE. And you will, of course, constantly have turnover, right? We've seen this a lot since the pandemic. How do you make sure the information and data is transferred? Next slide. So measurement verification, right? This is the single greatest difference between normal design bid build to do lighting, HVAC, controls, whatever, and a performance contract. And again, we had a whole training we just did in February. This is a link at the bottom right-hand corner there you can watch on YouTube. And it talks about how M&V is absolutely essential to these projects, right? And it basically allows your ESCO to measure before and after, whether it's, old air conditioning equipment that's using, 100,000 kilowatt hours a year, and the new equipment is going to use 50,000 kilowatt hours a year. That can all be calculated out between in the field testing and energy modeling, so that you actually have a realistic estimate of what's going to be saved and how it's going to be saved, and then how you can measure it after the fact, right? Like, the famous saying, what you don't measure, you can't manage. Next slide. And the same with operation, maintenance, repair, and replacement, right? So you can actually claim operations and maintenance savings, right? I keep talking about old air conditioning, right? That's a big problem, right? A lot of the school districts and municipalities I've worked in over the years, you're taking out 40-year-old chillers and boilers and rooftop units and putting in brand new ones. And you were paying sometimes tens of thousands of dollars a year just keeping those things operating, right? Rewinding motors, putting, duct tape around things, baling wire around things, and all that. By replacing those, your maintenance costs are going to go, right? You can cut your contract in half probably with your maintenance folks if you have outside service. So you need to develop the baseline around that. How much are we actually spending now? It needs to be documented. You can't just, sort of thumbnail it. Figure out who's going to be doing what, right? And again, this risk responsibility matrix does all this for you. So if you're going to be maintaining everything, you need to make sure your folks know what their requirements are. And the ESCO will put all of that into the training that they get, including all the operations manuals. And as the project goes forward, the ESCO is going to be noticing, right? Typically, they do an annual measurement verification report. They're going to be pointing out any deficiencies that they see in your folks' operations and maintenance, right? So this can be a great tool for folks who are running municipalities and school districts and so on. It helps you give your staff clear-eyed scope of work for what they're actually responsible for. Where, a lot of time with new buildings, the keys get handed over. Here's 6-inch binders. Good luck, right? And have all these fancy new systems they haven't been taught on. And it's much different with a performance contract, right? So you want to make sure that stuff gets taken care of. And then finally, the verification, the owner needs to document their tasks and witness and verify these ESCO tests to avoid disputes. And again, getting your folks in early before things are replaced and then afterwards. Next slide. And save everything in eProject Express, right? We have a link here. You can put everything in this database. It's a free online encrypted database, right? So that you can have your ESCO. And what we're seeing in a lot of places, put this into the ESCO's contract so that says, as part of your deal, your scope is to not only do the work, but it's to upload all of the stuff into eProject Express. It's very easy to do. You just get an account. We'll talk about this in a few minutes, but there's going to be a training here in next month. You can put the baseline, the IGAA, the ESPC agreement, meeting minutes, anything you want, put up into eProject Express, right? And it does sorting and reporting and all that. It's absolutely wonderful tool. Next slide. So time to celebrate, right? You've done your project. Everything's been recorded. You get into the performance period. You'll typically have an annual measurement and verification report the ESCO needs to provide you. Like in some states, like in North Carolina and in Delaware and other states, they've got to do this, right? By statute, right? So you're going to be getting a report every year, almost like a report card that says, yes, we said we were going to save you $1 million a year. You're saving $1.012 million a year. And here's how. Measure by measure, here's how you're saving it, right? And again, if you have an owner's rep, you want to have them review those for you every year. Or if your state energy office sometimes does that, make sure you get that outside help, because these things can be a little bit cryptic. So you want to promote the benefits of this, right? Dollar savings, huge, is probably the biggest thing about these. Local economic development. These creates thousands and thousands of local jobs every year. We did a few here in Nevada. 10, 12 years ago when the economy was really in bad shape. It was like 15% unemployment here. And we did $75 million worth of performance contracting. It created thousands of jobs. It kept folks from leaving the state. Um, New equipment that works, improved air quality, safety, community education and engagement. We've seen these being integrated with school programs and community rec centers and so on. And environmental benefits like greenhouse gas reductions, improving resilience. It's huge in areas where it's a big problem. And you can do all this through, going groundbreaking ceremonies, ribbon cuttings, case studies, webinars, and awards and recognition. And we think that's huge, especially for the project champions and the people who have really made this happen. Give them some kudos for doing that. Next slide. So, closing thoughts. I think we have we're going to do this first and then the poll. Deb?
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, we have a poll, and Jamie, if you can go ahead and launch that while we're kind of wrapping up with closing thoughts, and we'll also get to the chat messages as well. These trainings are designed for you, and so we want them to be helpful. And so we're going to leave this poll up for a few minutes. Please respond to it. And this is not only for this training today, but if you've been able to participate in the first 5, please, this sort of captures that as well. So we're trying to make these better and more relevant and useful to you to help everyone up the learning curve. So we'll leave this up as we kind of conclude and wrap things up.
Okay, sure. All right, should we go to the next slide? All right, we'll talk about office hours and then we'll get to the questions and answers. So I'd mentioned this earlier, right? And as you can tell, if this is your first training, there's a lot here, right? And I've been talking at the speed of light. I apologize for that, but there's a lot here, right? And it's a great topic. There's a lot to it, but boy, once you learn how to do this, and again, I learn something new every project I've worked on. Once you really get into this, you see that what an absolutely wonderful tool this is for anybody in the public space. And these days, NGOs as well, nonprofits can use performance contracting. These office hours, right, we're really hoping a lot of you take us up on these office hours. They can really, really help. Again, we've done this a few times now. We help people get things unstuck, or if they had a project they want to start, or they've had one going on and there's some issues, or there's one that had been done previously and something just doesn't seem right with it. The payments are too much compared to the savings. Something is there. They want to have somebody do it, like a quick forensic look at it. We can help you with that, right? So pretty much anything, any questions along this, just please get in touch. Just sign up with these office hours, sign up form. Next slide. We have a whole bunch of resources. The YouTube channel that we already talked about, our US Energy Services Coalition have a whole bunch of podcasts that we put together a few years ago. There's the ESPC Toolkit DOE did, I mentioned earlier. The PCNRC website's very helpful. Energy Star, most of you have already heard about. That's been around for like 30 years now. Funding and Incentives Resource Hub and the Financing Navigator, right? So this is a great thing that I didn't even know about until recently, where you can go to that site and it gives you a lot of help on how to really navigate financing with performance contracting. Next slide. All right, and finally, the ESPC campaign, right? So most of you have seen this already and you read about it coming in, so we won't spend a lot of time, but basically what Department of Energy is trying to do, and Laura Carpenter's done a great job with this, and with help from Hannah and Dan, supporting the use of performance contracting to increase efficiency, modernizing public buildings, reducing utility expenses, increasing resilience, right, which is getting greater and greater importance as we get more and more storms, more and more floods, more and more fires. It's really important. And meet lead by example goals, right? And we're trying to share best practices, amplify best practices, demonstrate impact with M&V, which is what our last training was about. Hopefully you go back and watch that as well and start showcasing some of these achievements, like these 3 case studies we showed earlier. Hopefully you can go click on those. So if you're not a supporter already, we ask you to please join. You'll get a lot more out of these trainings, because these trainings are really only for members, really. So you can ask questions without having, people from the marketplace out there. So please complete an expression of interest and get on board as soon as you can. Next slide.
And Chris, just on this piece too, I wanted to highlight the value, the Ask an Expert office hours. You've talked about this already.
Yep.
This is just to be clear, these are professional services hours support provided to you as a campaign member at no cost to you. These are resources provided through the Department of Energy's ESPC campaign. So if there are specific questions you have on specific projects, if you're stuck, if you think that there may be some misunderstanding between you and your ESCO, this is really a terrific tool to help work through those issues.
Yep, for sure. All right. Upcoming events. So we've got a peer exchange coming up in April. We're working on it now. Haven't quite put it together yet, right? With all the stuff that's been going on in the market. We should have some information out here in the next week or two with dates, topics, but it's basically going to be people just like you, much market participants who've been doing ESPC projects, and they want to basically share some helpful suggestions, some tips and lessons learned from actual projects. Then April 29th, there's going to be a webinar, ESPC and E-Project Express for state agencies. For Courtney Bonus from California DGS is great. Department of Sustainability or Office of Sustainability. Learn how EPX can really make it easy for project owners and ESCOs to manage their projects and track their data and report on, right? And it's a fabulous tool. And then the office hours. Again, next slide. Lastly, we have Jamie Garrett on here who is collecting case studies for us. And again, if you have projects that you've done, and one or two of you have already submitted, please submit information. We'd love to give you some, kudos for doing these projects and showing other people like you that this can be done successfully, right? And it's, again, a great tool. And the more folks see that this is a real thing and it's not like a huge stretch, it's not too risky, the more and more of this will get done over time. Next slide. And that's it.